the cinematic universe. By now I think we're all familiar and probably sick of this once novel concept. For nearly 2 decades now, the cinematic universe has dominated our cinemas and popular culture. Namely, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been at the forefront of this interconnected cinematic web of stories. It of course hasn't been only Marvel pumping out blockbuster after blockbuster that all exist in the same universe. Many have tried and most have failed to establish anything nearly as powerful as the MCU. DC gave it a fair shot with Zack Snyder and Henry Cavill in Man of Steel that ended up crashing and burning with Jason Momoa's Aquaman 2. We had Sony and their Sony Pictures universe of Marvel movies, or SPUM for short, gaining a couple more $1 billion from their projects. One success that most people fail to talk about is Legendary Pictures and The King of Skull Island. One of my personal favorite cinematic failures is Universal's Dark Universe, an attempt to bring classic monsters into the modern day. With only one installment under its belt and a hell of a lot of bravado for future films that never saw the light of day. I mean seriously, who cares to see a cinematic universe filled with classic monsters like Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and Dracula? Well, most people blame the MCU for the rise of the cinematic universe. But I blame the Dark Universe. No, not that Dark Universe with Tom Cruise and the Mummy. I'm talking about this Dark Universe.
I am Dracula.
Even the moon's frightened of me, frightened to death.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
The original Dark Universe. The first ever cinematic universe that made its way to cinemas almost 100 years ago. Of course, I was being facetious when I asked, who cares about a modern-day cinematic universe with Universal classic monsters? I care. I care immensely, and it's a shame Universal put the cart before the horse and never figured out how to make it work. These stories are so simple, it baffles me that a studio has no idea how to adapt stories like Frankenstein and Dracula that have been beloved for around 150 years. Thankfully, we don't need a modern cinematic universe when we have the original cinematic universe. As iconic as the classic monsters are, I don't think many people realize that it was a fairly coherent and interconnected cinematic universe that spans through around 30 films. I say around because the list does get a bit contentious when determining the actual continuity of the films themselves. Let's take a trip down the dark forest, past the cemetery, and into Dracula's castle. This is the wonderfully twisted tale of the Universal classic monsters. In 1884, a German-Jewish immigrant named Carl Laemmle immigrated to the United States, finding his first home in Chicago, Illinois. Laemmle worked a variety of odd jobs until he found himself as a bookkeeper. In 1906, all of that would change. Laemmle set his sights on the bustling new industry of the motion picture. His savvy business knowledge and marketing expertise allowed him to open up one of the first motion picture theaters in Chicago. This industry was choke-held by none other than Thomas Edison, and Laemmle was one of his main competitors in the state of Illinois. Laemmle found very early success in the film industry, being one of the pioneers of using stars to market a picture. In 1909, Laemmle moved to New York and changed his production company from Yankee Film Company into Independent Motion Pictures, or IMP. This would be the groundwork for what was to become Universal Studios. In the coming years, IMP would merge with 5 film studios: Champion Film Company, Powers Motion Picture Company, New York Motion Picture Company, Nestor Film Company, and Rex Motion Picture Company. The founders of each studio would be absorbed as serving members of the brand new Universal Film Manufacturing Company. By 1912, the studio released its first film, a 20-minute motion picture titled The Dawn of Netta. For the next 3 years, the studio would steadily release film after film, spearheaded by the one and only Carl Laemmle. In 1915, Universal Film Manufacturing Company opened their flagship studio in the heart of Hollywood itself, Los Angeles, California. This was no ordinary studio. Mr. Laemmle had his sights set on glory, and the studio became the largest motion picture studio in Hollywood. Not only was its sheer size impressive, but Laemmle, ever the salesman, decided to open up this studio to tourists, which is the blueprint for Universal's theme parks in the modern day. Universal pioneered the star system in these early days, the same reason we go see a movie just because Timothée Chalamet is in it today. Laemmle was a visionary and knew a name alone could carry a picture into a financial success for the company. Lon Chaney was that man. A man born to 2 deaf parents who mastered the art of expression. In his early years, he toured around on vaudeville shows until making his film debut around 1912. By the late 1910s, Chaney went from underpaid character actor to world-famous superstar and makeup artist. The thing that set Chaney apart from the other character actors at the time was his skill in special effects, disguising himself in the most ingenious ways possible. Chaney started to gain interest in playing the role of Quasimodo in a film adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Chaney himself actually gained the rights to produce the film, showing just how dedicated he was to bringing the tragedy to the silver screen. Chaney spoke to Universal to get this film produced, but it's unclear as to why the initial talks fell through. Chaney then sought out a new studio, namely Chelsea Pictures, a German studio. These plans also fell through, and Chelsea Pictures disappeared into the annals of history. Enter Irving Thalberg. Thalberg wanted to renegotiate these plans with Chaney on behalf of Universal. Thalberg wanted to produce a more artistically sound picture than most of the other films that Universal produced at the time. Thalberg pitched Hunchback as a tragic love story and not just some monster movie. Chaney was, as mentioned, very significant in film at the time, and that mixed with Thalberg's pitch landed a win for Chaney and his passion project. The Hunchback of Notre Dame hit theaters on September 6, 1923, and was a massive success. The film grossed $3.5 million, calculating for inflation, that's a whopping $68 million today. It was Universal Studios' highest grossing picture of all time at the time. It was an explosive feature and was the first, quote-unquote, monster movie Universal would create. You'd expect this prologue of the cinematic universe to end here, but the qualification for a true Universal monster movie is quite contentious. A monster movie made by Universal and a Universal monster movie are two very different things. There's one more film I have to touch on, one certainly more iconic, one that was another massive success in the final silent monster film Universal would create. That picture is The Phantom of the Opera. The idea for the creation of Phantom started only a year before Hunchback hit theaters. Mr. Laemmle was on a family vacation in Paris, France. There, Laemmle had a once-in-a-lifetime encounter with Gaston Leroux, the author of La Fantôme de l'Opéra. Laemmle expressed his love for the Paris Opera House, in which the conversation flamed on between the two men passionate for the art of stage plays. Leroux gave Laemmle a copy of his book, and that night Laemmle read the entire thing front to back. The next day, Laemmle purchased the right and set Lon Chaney again to star as the Phantom himself. This was yet another outlet for Chaney to show off his enigmatic makeup skills. Prior to the film's release, all promotional art for the film actively hid the Phantom's gruesome visage, leading to one of the greatest jump scares in cinema history. The film premiered on the same day as Hunchback on September 6th in 1925, just 2 years later. The picture was another rollicking success for Universal and Chaney. It grossed around $2 million, which is around $38 million today. This would surely count as the first true Universal monster movie, right? Well, even this is debated. So what makes a Universal monster movie stand out from a monster movie that Universal created? These two films were incredible successes for Universal and jump-started their entire monstrous franchise, so why are they technically not canon? Well, from what I can see, canon is loosely defined, however, it seems defined by two things: crossing over with another monster and sequels, but even that is a bit confusing. A lot of it also has to do with retroactive marketability and DVD box sets as well. Since this universe was not a planned idea from the start, there is no possible way that the Hunchback and Phantom would have ever appeared in the hard canon. There are more films I will discuss that are even further from canon than those two, but for a lot of people the Hunchback and Phantom are canon, and for such a messy issue like this, it's completely reasonable to add them to your rewatch. For this retrospective, the canonicity of movies will be slightly taken into consideration. The universe obviously was not built from an idea to have a sprawling series, but rather a natural progression of the film that came before it. For this retrospective on these classic monsters, the main players that are firmly included in the canon that fans and Universal promote, and the ones I'll be discussing, are Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, and the Wolfman. These are the Universal monsters, the top dogs of the horror silver screen. To keep this video shorter than 5 hours, these are who I'm going to focus on. This documentary will focus on behind-the-scenes stories and tales and will not feature too many spoilers or extensive plot breakdowns, so if you've never seen any Universal monster movie, you can take solace in knowing you'll learn a thing or two without being viciously spoiled throughout. Eagle-eyed fans may notice that a certain scaly fiend is missing from the list, but he's more important to the dissection of the canon and the cinematic universe as a whole, so I'll keep his fishy name out of my mouth for a little while. Let's start at the true beginning of our cinematic universe with our first monster, the Transylvanian Impaler, the Prince of Darkness, the Undead Count, Dracula. Since this is the true beginning of the Universal monsters, we have to look at the man behind the curtain. Carl Laemmle had gifted his son, Carl Laemmle Jr., the head of production at Universal Studios, as his 21st birthday present in 1928. This move in extreme nepotism would usher in a totally new era for the studio. Since we are dealing with two Laemmles of the same name, I'm going to refer to Laemmle Jr. simply as Jr., which was the nickname given to him by his family, for the remainder of the documentary. Jr.'s first big year was 1930. 2 films debuted under his belt, King of Jazz and All Quiet on the Western Front. This bold choice for Laemmle Sr. to promote his 21-year-old son ended up being a big swing, but luckily it paid off, as All Quiet on the Western Front was a smashing victory for the young and hungry producer. Jr. spent the majority of his life surrounded by show business, and his understanding of what made a good picture paid off tenfold. Jr., with his newfound success, wanted to produce his own horror masterpiece to rival his father's. Jr. set his eyes on another adaptation, this one being an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Universal purchased the rights from the Stoker estate for around $40,000, which was a far cry from the first book-to-screen adaptation of Dracula, Nosferatu, in which they just changed some of the names of the characters and ended up getting sued by the Stoker estate. I do have an entire documentary on that if you have any interest in that wild tale. Jr.'s Dracula was going to be Universal's first horror movie with sound, and the studio decided to film 2 separate pictures at the same time, one in English and one in Spanish. It seems silly, but remember, films with sounds were still extremely new at the time, and overdubbing and subtitles were an issue they hadn't figured out just yet, so the alternative was just to make the same movie twice. Everything was in place, and the titular Dracula was already casted. Lon Chaney would return to play the Undead Count, making it his 3rd appearance as the title monster in a Universal picture. Unfortunately, Chaney passed away from a long battle with pneumonia. Universal scrambled to find the right guy. They passed it along to multiple actors. Difficulties with scheduling and screen time impeded their search. One actor was privy to Universal's issues with gaining their monsters and urged the studio to consider him. This actor was Hungarian-born Bela Lugosi. Lugosi actually had tons of experience playing Dracula since he played the vampire for multiple years in a traveling stage play. Universal originally had no interest in Lugosi despite his knack for channeling a centuries-old count on stage. Lugosi protested and finally both parties came to an agreement. Lugosi could play Dracula if he took a reduced salary of $500 per week. Some other incredible cast members joined the production. Dwight Frye became Dracula's bumbling thrall, the Mad Renfield.
Rats.
Edward Sloane, who acted alongside Lugosi in the stage play as the vampire hunter Van Helsing, joined the movie to reprise his role. A standout is Helen Chandler as Mina, the hypnotized, dreamlike victim of Dracula's lustful antics. The film was shot over the course of only 36 days. The film's director, Todd Browning, was actually absent a lot of the time on set, so the job went to cinematographer Carl Freund. The film had a very loose and hectic production, as well as the cast not really being able to bond with the main man himself. It's said that Lugosi more or less method acted for the majority of the filming schedule, being mysterious and distant, but always charming and polite when around his colleagues. On a budget of around $350,000, Dracula would go on to make $1 million at the box office, making it Universal's most successful film of 1931. The Spanish version unfortunately suffered a different fate. It failed at the box office and convinced Universal that filming 2 films back-to-back was a limp investment, so the first time they did it became the only time they did it. Dracula, over the years, like most of the other Universal monster movies, became iconic.
Listen to them. Children of the night.
It's hard to imagine Dracula without Bela Lugosi.
We will be leaving tomorrow evening.
His mannerisms, appearance, and overall vibe just is Dracula. The film, again like most of the other ones, has a thick, dreamlike quality. The entire film is drenched in fog and feels like a passionate nightmare. This is my personal go-to Universal monster flick. It may not be the best, but at 3 a.m. on a cold October night, there's nothing better than Dracula.
I am Dracula.
Junior had found his success in the monster business, and he was not going to stop at one film. Not long after, Junior announced his next project. This one featuring the maddest scientist to hit the lab, the neck-bolted nuisance, and the hunchback horror. Let's take a look at 1931's Frankenstein. In April of 1931, just 2 months after the rousing success of Dracula, Universal realized they were now in the monster business and purchased the rights to the other most iconic monster of all time, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Universal actually didn't purchase the outright rights of adapting the novel, but rather the stage play, which was an adaptation of the novel in and of itself. So Universal purchased the rights to an adaptation to make an adaptation. Now that's thinking like a mad doctor. Robert Florey developed the script and decided to bring along some alumni from Dracula, namely Dwight Frye as Fritz, Frankenstein's assistant, and Bela Lugosi as the monster. Lugosi was keen on joining the project, but wanted to play Dr. Frankenstein instead. It didn't help Lugosi's case that during film tests, the original design for the monster looked more like a scarecrow than the flat-topped giant we know today. Junior had seen this test footage and bursted out laughing, and just like that, Florey and Lugosi were taken off the film. It's unclear as to if Lugosi was let go or if he decided to leave on his own accord, since he was already unhappy with his role in the film. James Whale was hired by Universal to direct the picture. Whale already had 3 films under his belt, but was by no means a household name. With 2 new screenwriters, a director, and a handful of the supporting cast, Universal went on another monster hunt. David Lewis, James Whale's significant other, recommended that they cast a stage actor that Lewis had recently seen in the play The Criminal Code. The actor was Boris Karloff, a relatively tall and skinny man who seemed perfect enough to not only be a great fit for Frankenstein's monster, but also a fantastic canvas for makeup artist Jack P. Pierce to sculpt his monstrous makeup on. The team worked together on a multitude of makeup designs for the monster. Most of them just looked like a shambling Neanderthal, but there is one that stands out. This old concept art shows the monster looking more like a robot man than Frankenstein's monster, but it did set the groundwork for the monster's most distinguishing feature, the neck bolts. Whale and Pierce decided that if they were going to convey the monster's profound, macabre despair of being almost alive, almost human, they were going to work off of Karloff's own face and not cover him in a pound of makeup to achieve that look. They finally had it. Their monster. It was alive. It was electric. So electric that Junior assumed it would scare the ladies on set, so Karloff had to wear a veil while walking around on the backlot. The pieces were put in place and audiences were raring to get a glimpse of Universal's next monster movie. On a budget of $262,000, that hype paid off as Frankenstein made $1.4 million in its November release. If Dracula was a wake-up call, then Frankenstein was a million alarms telling Universal that they were squarely in the horror business.
You're hurting me! No!
After two major successes, it was clear to Junior and the company that expanding this budding franchise would rake in dollar after dollar.
I made it with my own hands from the bodies I took from graves, from the gallows, anywhere.
Frankenstein itself is a contemplative film as opposed to Dracula.
You never wanted to look beyond the clouds and the stars, or to know what causes the trees to bud?
It's also a lot funnier, which shouldn't be a plus, but if you've seen Frankenstein, you know the goofy humor adds so much to the ambience of the film.
Henry! Frankenstein! Henry! Frankenstein!
I'd be remiss to go through this entire story of Frankenstein and not mention Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein.
Crazy am I? We'll see whether I'm crazy or not.
Dr. Frankenstein is my personal favorite character in any Universal monster movie. He is truly mad. It's hard to believe the man is acting.
Quite a good scene, isn't it? One man crazy, three very sane spectators.
His obsession drives the entire movie, and as cliche as it may be, the "It's Alive" monologue belongs high on my list for greatest scenes in cinema history. The desperation, the insanity, and then that reveal.
It's alive!
If you haven't seen it, it should be at the top of your list. Universal wasted no time churning out their next monstrous feature. Let's take a look down the catacombs into the Pharaoh's chamber and take a peek into the sarcophagi. This is The Mummy. Universal had struck gold adapting timeless monsters from novels, so why break up that tradition? Audiences had responded so well to the film adaptations of mad science and vampires, so Junior decided to look for his next classic monster to put on the silver screen. Universal looked at the popular culture around them for inspiration and saw that the frenzy for Egyptology was still alive following Howard Carter's discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb. It didn't take long for the studio to greenlight a film based around the ancient lore of Egypt. They quickly ran into an issue following the initial idea's inception. Every other monster movie that Universal created was an adaptation of a novel. It's not like Universal was full of talentless hacks who could only draw stories from pre-existing material, but this did prove to be a challenge. Was the concept of the Mummy good enough for a story, or were these monster movies only successful due to there already being an interest in the intellectual property that came prior to the film? Junior hired Richard Schayer to develop the screenplay, and Schayer brought on Nina Wilcox Putnam, a highly accomplished female screenwriter, to help assist. The two wrote a story about the magician Cagliostro, who kept himself alive for thousands of years. This would form the basis for The Mummy. Junior pushed the story ahead and hired John L. Balderston to craft the final script for the film. Not only did Balderston assist in writing the previous two films, Dracula and Frankenstein, but he used to work as a journalist, and one of his high-profile stories was the real opening of King Tutankhamun's tomb. It's unclear as to if this is how he nabbed the writing job on The Mummy, but if not, it happened to be a major coincidence that lended a real lived experience with an actual mummy to add to the film. Karloff had done such a fantastic job portraying the monster in Frankenstein, so the crew thought it would be a perfect fit to come back for The Mummy to play the mummy itself. The monster in this film leaned closer to Dracula, a cunning ancient aristocrat rather than a mindless rampager like Frankenstein's monster, but Karloff was a generational talent, so his skills were easily utilized to bring terror to the set and screen.
I break your dried flesh to pieces, but your power is too strong.
Most people think of the mummy in this film as a shambling man wrapped in bandages, but for the majority of the film, Karloff portrays the resurrected Imhotep, who goes by the alias Ardith Bey. Imhotep was a real-life Egyptian architect who was made a fictional villain for the film, who seeks to restore his long-lost love, Anck-su-namun. Makeup artist Jack Pierce returned as well to lend his skills to the project and created yet another incredibly iconic visage in horror culture. Yet another Universal Monster alumni was added to the cast in the form of its director, Karl Freund. We last spoke about Freund as the cinematographer for Dracula, but we all know now that he did more directing than Todd Browning. Freund was eager to prove himself since this was his true directorial debut, and his attitude rubbed the cast the wrong way. He was extremely hungry and talented, always being on the go and using creative camera movements, but he consistently butted heads with the lead actress, Zita Johann, who played the revived princess Anck-su-namun. Johann herself was quite an interesting person, being extremely spiritual and a self-described mystic, but her and Freund would get into it. Apparently on the first day of filming, Freund tried to paint Johann as some kind of prima donna. It's unclear as to how this all worked out, all we really know is that the set was extremely tense. The Mummy debuted on a budget of around $200,000, and unfortunately, I was not able to find a solid number for its box office return. We know that it was a success, but the actual dollar amount is not available, which is common for movies that are nearly 100 years old. The Mummy was an overall critical and commercial success, but not nearly as much as the previous two. Some critics found it a little too similar to Dracula, with the monstrous ancient romance being a focal point of the plot. This was the first sign that maybe Universal wasn't perfect, and in my opinion, I'd agree with the negative criticisms. Out of the main Universal monster movies, this is easily my least favorite. I don't find its slow pace to be interesting like the others, it becomes dull very quickly. It has a very nice atmosphere, but it fails to deliver an interesting monster in the form of the Mummy, and lacks memorable side characters. There's no Dr. Frankenstein or Renfield to add spice to the picture. I'm curious if you agree with me. It is one of my more controversial takes, but hey, that's what the comment section is for. Despite my personal misgivings, The Mummy was a success, and of course it gave way for the next project to be greenlit by Universal. The quiet town of Iping lays home to one of the greatest minds of our generation. The man who went mad from science. The man who went too far. This is The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man's role in this story actually started long before The Mummy and long before Frankenstein. He's always been here. What, did you not notice him yet? In reality, The Invisible Man was pitched to Junior as a follow-up to Dracula, urging him to purchase the rights of the novel The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Junior, of course, decided to go with Frankenstein as the follow-up to Dracula in 1931, but our invisible friend wasn't on the back burner for long. Junior realized that even though they weren't going ahead with an adaptation of The Invisible Man right that second, it might be good to secure the rights for the novel regardless. Universal purchased the rights for just $10,000. The novel itself is not inherently horrific, so Universal decided to play it safe and secure the rights to another book about an invisible man, one with a more horror vibe throughout. Universal had the rights to The Invisible Man and the novel The Murder Invisible by Philip Wiley. Over the next 2 years, the film was sort of in a strange development hell. It's not the kind of development hell we think of, but nonetheless, there was something difficult that surrounded the feature. The initial plan was to have a Frankenstein reunion, have James Whale direct and Boris Karloff to star. Whale left the project soon after due to his fears of being typecast as a horror director. Plenty of writers tried their hands at the script, and for some reason, it just wasn't working. Finally, British playwright and World War I veteran R.C. Sheriff submitted his screenplay, and it was the one. Universal had finally struck gold. Well, they would have struck gold if they had a director or star for the picture. After an arduous discussion, Whale finally decided to join The Invisible Man as the director. Karloff unfortunately was unable to play the titular character, so Whale looked for yet another Frankenstein alum in Dr. Frankenstein himself, Colin Clive. Clive was definitely a fantastic choice. He had already proven that he could play a mad doctor, and my biases are shown because yeah, I love Colin Clive. Regardless, that was not meant to be. Whale wanted to stay close to English talent, and that's when he found the man he wanted. A mad, commanding voice, a man who could terrify without showing an ounce of anger or insanity on his face. Claude Rains was that man.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you.
Originally, Whale thought Rains' audition was just abysmal, but Whale saw something in the actor that others did not, and he was given the role of Dr. Jack Griffin, the Invisible Man.
Suddenly I realized the power I held. The power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
Rains was initially weirded out by the entire affair. This was completely new to him, and now he would spend an entire film with the special effects department and covered in bandages. While on the subject of the special effects, it's impossible to talk about the film and not mention the insane lengths the crew went to in making us believe that this man was actually invisible. There were a multitude of tricks utilized in order for the effects to be convincing enough. Whale employed John P. Fulton to work on the post-production effects. Whale and Fulton worked extremely closely together during the back half of the project, and that synergy is the reason why these tricks really came together. Tricks like the invisible footprints in the snow used footprint-shaped platforms that would sink underneath the layer of rock salt with the help of pegs. The pegs drop, and the footprint platform falls, creating the illusion of a truly invisible man walking around the snow. Subtle things like a chair sinking beneath the invisible weight of Dr. Griffin. One of my favorite scenes is the bicycle scene where Dr. Griffin rides a bike through the town cackling like a madman.
I'm afraid I need this bicycle.
He stole me bike!
Here's your blooming bicycle. You can do what you like with it.
The scene was done with the bike being suspended on wires and utilizing a hidden track. Of course, the most iconic scene of the entire movie has to be when Dr. Griffin unveils his invisible ailment for the first time.
How do you like that, eh?
This was an extremely difficult effect to pull off. The invisibility was done with a black velvet blanket over Rains' head with a black velvet background, which the team was then able to layer into the scene, giving us the effect of true invisibility. The crew also utilized another clever trick to portray the invisibility, hiding Rains' head underneath the collar of his shirt and using a wireframe head wrapped in bandages. These effects, combined with Rains' fantastically weird, hilarious, and threatening performance, made this movie a hit.
Here we go gathering nuts in May, nuts in May, nuts in May. Here we go gathering nuts in May.
The film cost Universal around $330,000 to complete. This was during a time when Universal was hemorrhaging money. During the long period of planning this film, Universal lost $1.2 million, and this film was part of their Hail Mary project. Just like Dr. Griffin, Universal's fears disappeared. Only 4 days in one theater netted The Invisible Man 80,000 tickets. Unfortunately, like The Mummy, we don't have an actual box office number, but for the purpose of this documentary, that doesn't matter. All that matters is that this incredible film helped save Universal. Speaking of this film being incredible, I cannot stress enough how badly I recommend this film. Of all of the Universal Monsters pictures, this could possibly be my favorite. It's deranged, funny, and terrifying. I mentioned earlier how well Claude Rains brings the Mad Doctor to life. His line delivery of this alone should entice you to watch it.
We'll begin with a reign of terror. A few murders here and there.
Rains plays Griffin so straight, it's hard not to fall for his unhinged charisma.
The nation that wins my secret can sweep the world with invisible armies.
If you're a fan of dark humor, well-done special effects, or hell, just a good movie, go watch 1933's Invisible Man. James Whale will never let you down. I could talk about The Invisible Man all day, but thankfully our next trip brings us right back into the barren castles of Germany. Something is still alive, and something new is pulsing to life. Let's take a look at our first sequel of this documentary, the one I will undoubtedly spend the most time with. It's time to join the doctors and take a look at the Bride of Frankenstein. Ever since the success of Frankenstein in 1931, Universal knew they had an untapped goldmine of sequels. A Frankenstein sequel suffered the same fate as The Invisible Man, being stuck in writing hell. The Return of Frankenstein was set to be the title of the next film, but James Whale, director of the original and Invisible Man, wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. Whale, of course, went on to direct The Invisible Man, and his input in the Frankenstein sequel was completely quelled. It didn't take long for that sentiment to change. In 1934, Whale finally gave up and began working on a sequel to Frankenstein from the ground up with the assistance of the writer of Invisible Man, R.C. Sheriff. Whale and Sheriff were not meant to make a cheesy, cheap sequel. They knew how important the original was to so many people that they had to deliver something of true value. This sequel really hurt Whale artistically, but that hurt drove him to create the best follow-up he could. The incredible script the two came up with was, of course, met with a lot of pushback. 1934 was a disastrous year for film with the implementation of the Hays Code. The Hays Code could probably be an entire video in and of itself, but I will give a short explanation for the context of Bride's story and our story following. The Hays Code came about throughout the 20s and 30s when multiple states formed cinema censorship committees. These folks called for Hollywood and the United States government to do something about the so-called moral impurities of films. The man called upon to enforce these ludicrous demands was William H. Hays. Hays was the former chairman of the Republican National Committee and new president of the freshly established Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, or MPPDA. The goal was to enforce films to follow a strict set of guidelines in order to achieve approval from the MPPDA. The rule list was split into two factions, don'ts and be carefuls. Here's just a few off the list of don'ts. Don't swear, don't ridicule the clergy, and don't make reference or show anything related to sexual hygiene, and perhaps the strangest in the don't category, don't show white slavery. I'm not sure why specifically they had to say white slavery, how about no slavery at all, but these were the 1930s, and the men making this list were white religious extremists with only regards for the well-being of their perceived moral high ground. Right, back to our story at hand. This code was a huge problem in getting the developing Frankenstein sequel off the ground. Whale worked with the code much to his chagrin and finally found a story he felt was worth telling. The big three from the original Frankenstein cast reunited to reprise their roles. Colin Clive came back to play Dr. Henry Frankenstein, Dwight Fry returned to play another bumbling assistant, and of course, Boris Karloff returned to play the sympathetic monster. Makeup artist Jack Pierce lended his talents yet again to bring both monsters to life. The two most important new characters needed fantastic talent to bring them to life as well. The first character they needed to cast was the newest villain, Dr. Septimus Praetorius. Whale, of course, went British for his casting and chose Ernst Thesiger, who delivers a delightfully devious performance alongside Dr. Frankenstein as yet another mad scientist.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
The most important casting had to go to the Bride of Frankenstein herself. Whale, ever the perfectionist, knew that it was crucial to get this femme fatale monster right. Plenty of lovely talent was considered, but no one would be able to convey the terror and confusion of the bride quite like Elsa Lanchester. The story of the sequel borrowed a lot from Mary Shelley's original novel, so much so that Whale decided to film a prologue for the picture of Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, and Lord Byron. The three real people questioned the whimsical and weird of reality. Lanchester, who played the bride so perfectly, played dual roles, bringing not only the monster, but bringing Mary Shelley herself to life. These dual roles really highlight how right the ever-talented Lanchester was for the role. The Bride of Frankenstein premiered on April 20th, 1935, on a budget of around $400,000, which was about $100,000 over the budget they wanted to spend. The film was a massive success. I'm not able to find a specific box office return for when the film was released, but multiple sources say within 10 years of its premiere, it grossed around $2 million. Money was what mattered to the studio, but thankfully for Whale, the film was a critical success as well. Whale spent so much time worrying about the art of selling out with a sequel to a certified classic, but his determination, creativity, and artistry paid off. In my opinion, this is better or equal to the original. James Whale really outdid himself, and it truly shows. It's such a perfect follow-up to Frankenstein. It is laden with subtext as well, plenty of religious and Christian imagery. A lot of people interpret the monster as a Christ-like figure or a smear against God, being a living thing created by man. Another big subtextual theme is homosexuality. James Whale himself was an openly gay man in a time where that was anything but the norm. Whale denies the gay influence throughout, but many gay film scholars notice Dr. Frankenstein and Dr. Pretorius' relationship as being homosexual in nature.
I do hope you won't upset Henry.
We must work together.
Never. This is outrageous. I'm through with it.
Regardless if these two things were intentional, I just think that shows the everlasting power of the Bride of Frankenstein. Almost 100 years old, and not only is it a masterpiece of film, but we are still debating its true message and themes. This is one sequel you mustn't skip during your marathon down the dark, dreary streets of the Universal Monsters. After The Bride debuted, Universal took the wrong message. James Whale delivered a masterful sequel that rivaled the original, but Universal only saw the dollar number and pumped out sequel after sequel. For the sake of brevity and my sanity, these sequels will not get the same amount of attention as the main films that make up the mythos. If you are a personal fan of some of these sequels, please let me know down in the comments. Shortly after the release of Bride of Frankenstein in 1936, Universal was already in hot water. The studio consistently went over budget and had trouble regaining their losses, so during the filming of the film Showboat, they wanted quite the lavish production. This led them to borrow money from the Standard Capital Corporation, marking the first time in Universal history that the studio needed a crutch. Showboat went $300,000 over budget and Universal couldn't pay back their loan, so the studio was outright bought by Standard Capital, ending the reign of the Laemmles. Bride of Frankenstein would be the final Universal monster picture released under the original leadership. Dracula's Daughter released in 1936, being the first monster movie released under new management. The film stars Gloria Holden in the titular role of Dracula's daughter. The story follows Countess Maria Zaleska, the daughter in question, as she travels to London to confirm her father's death. It's a direct sequel and follows much of the original plot. Its budget was around $300,000, making it one of Universal's most expensive films to date. Its box office is unknown, but its reception was quite well by audiences and critics. In the modern age, it's hailed as a gothic icon, and that's well deserved. Gloria Holden is downright incredible throughout. Through the years, it also became an iconic film that represents the LGBTQ+ community, with Countess Zaleska being viewed as a lesbian character. So much so that the Hays Code was nervous to put it on screen, yet, like Dracula, the film was never truly going to die.
I'm ready now.
I suppose you'll want these pulled down, won't you?
Yes.
After Dracula's Daughter, Universal wouldn't make another horror film for about 3 whole years. In 1938, Universal would re-release Dracula and Frankenstein in theaters to a smashing success, proving how popular this universe still was. Now it was only a matter of time before the next film was created. Keeping with Dracula's family drama, we find Wolf von Frankenstein, son of Henry, returning to his family home in Son of Frankenstein, released in 1939. Wolf is coerced by the assistant Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, to revive the family monster, once again played by Boris Karloff, making it the last time he would play the monster in continuity. In this film, Igor tricks everyone and chaos ensues with the monster under his control. This is an absolute career-defining performance from Bela Lugosi as Igor, and it's this sinister portrayal that makes this movie so fun to watch and so difficult to keep your eyes away from.
They said I was dead. Then they cut me down.
So, Igor is dead.
Lugosi and Karloff had starred in a few pictures together since they were two of the most famous stars of this era, but despite them sharing that title, Karloff usually got the top billing. It's in films like this where we can really see what happens when those roles are reversed.
Yes, he was hunting.
The budget was around $400,000 and the box office was unknown, yet this sequel was reviewed well by critics and general audiences. Our next 2 films are both sequels to the fantastic original Invisible Man, so I felt it was proper to keep them together here. Both films were released in 1940, as this was a massive year of output for the studio. The Invisible Man Returns actually does not have the original Invisible Man, Jack Griffin, return at all. This Invisible Man is Jeffrey Radcliffe, who was framed for a murder he did not commit. With the help of Jack's brother, Frank Griffin, Radcliffe becomes the Invisible Man. This picture is perhaps most notably known for it being horror icon Vincent Price's first horror film. The film had a budget of around $280,000, and we actually know that its box office was $800,000, so it was a fairly successful picture. It was received middlingly well, but still paid for the next Invisible sequel, The Invisible Woman. The Invisible Woman is a strange footnote in the history of the Universal Monsters, since it's technically not a horror movie at all, it's a comedy through and through. The film stars Virginia Bruce as Kitty Carroll, our Invisible Woman. She's a test subject for an invisibility machine, and lo and behold, it works and she is thrust into translucent shenanigans, fighting gangsters and getting even with her old boss. The film had a $300,000 budget and grossed around $660,000 upon its release. It was praised for its special effects and even nominated for an Oscar. It was well liked, and I promise, it's not the last time we'll see an invisible person, if we even ever saw them in the first place. The third Universal Monster movie of 1940 takes us right back to ancient Egypt in The Mummy's Hand. This film is technically not a sequel at all to the original Mummy movie, as it features no returning characters, not even Imhotep as played by Boris Karloff. The plot follows two down-on-their-luck archaeologists who stumble upon great fortune at the ancient hill of the Seven Jackals, unknowingly awakening the mummy Charis. The film had a much smaller budget than the other movies I went over, only being around $84,000. Its box office is unknown, but with a smaller budget and a horror comedy flair, it proved successful. Critics and audiences found it entertaining, sometimes scary, sometimes funny, and sometimes painful. We've looked at a few of the middling sequels, but now it's time to return to our roots. There's a full moon and reports of a twisted howl carried through the fog. Let's take a look at our next big hit, The Wolfman. The concept of a cursed person turning into a werewolf on a full moon has been in countless cultures and folklore throughout the ages. It had also been on Universal's mind since 1913, when the studio released an 18-minute film titled The Werewolf. This film was similar only in certain concepts to what they would later create, featuring a woman who turns into a wolf-like creature with the help of Navajo magic. Universal also created another werewolf film in 1935, The Werewolf of London. This is a weird picture since it's commonly left out of Universal Monster canon discussion, mostly because the film was a complete flop and the studio quickly switched gears on their Wolfman. It was abundantly clear that the studio always wanted to feature a shape-shifting Wolfman in their mythos, and with a change in leadership, a fresh take was exactly the way to execute it. The studio hired Kurt Siodmak, a writer and novelist, to pen the screenplay. It's refreshing because from what I can find, this screenplay went off without a hitch, and Siodmak delivered something beloved from the start. Universal needed Larry Talbot, their leading man and monster, and that was also another clear decision. Lon Chaney Jr., who had proven himself with around a decade of work under his belt, and an extremely famous father, of course. Bela Lugosi partitioned hard for the role of the Wolfman, but was given the role of Bela, the werewolf that curses Talbot and kicks the entire plot into action. This was Chaney Jr.'s first Universal Monster movie, and his dedication was impeccable. Of course, the studio hired Jack Pierce to do the makeup and effects for the Wolfman. By this point, Jack Pierce was the linchpin of the entire Monster series. The makeup for the Wolfman took about 12 hours in total, 6 to apply, 6 to remove, making it an egregious process for Chaney Jr. The wolf transformation is different in this film than possibly any other werewolf movie, as it featured a slow phasing effect from man to monster. That process honestly seems worse than the makeup application, as Chaney Jr. had to sit motionless for hours while they slowly shot the fading transformation. The special effects guys would put tiny finishing pins into Chaney Jr.'s skin during close-ups so he was able to be as still as possible. Needless to say, Chaney Jr.'s first experience with the monsters was an arduous journey. For all the pain endured on the set of The Wolfman, and the fears that the film would suffer the same fate as the previous werewolf flop, The Wolfman premiered on December 12, 1941, with bated breath. If that date sounds vaguely familiar to you, it's because it was released only 5 days after the Japanese surprise attack on United States naval base Pearl Harbor. A declaration of war had occurred and Universal was urged to delay the movie, yet they released it. The fears were that nobody would see it because A, people were terrified, and B, it wouldn't do its job as a horror movie because war in real life is scarier than an actor covered in fur. Ironically, Universal made the right decision, I guess, because the film's box office was around $1 million on a budget of $180,000. I think people underestimate the power of escapism during times like these. Granted, I wasn't alive to witness the horror of front-page news showing a declaration of war, but I know in times of crisis, people like to be together and enjoy some fantasy to distract from the horrors of real life. The Wolfman is another one of my personal favorites, and in my opinion, one of the scariest of the classic Universal monsters. Talbot's internal and external struggle dealing with the monster within is timeless, and his fears turn into our fears very quickly.
I still got the charm you gave me, remember?
Yeah, I know, but I'm afraid. Your hand.
Can't see anything.
The Universal monsters never really got into the monster within trope until this movie, and I think it's one of the most effective and relatable horror tropes of all time.
The pentagram.
That scar could be made by most any animal.
Yes, but it's the sign of the werewolf. You don't understand. You think I'm insane.
Everyone can relate to their emotions getting the best of them, and exaggerated characters like Jekyll and Hyde, Banner and Hulk, and Talbot and the Wolfman never fail to bring the terror. It's time once again to return to our sequels, but even I can tell, something is building in this monstrous mythos. Universal finally decided to return to their monstrous roots with Ghost of Frankenstein.
The lightning. It is good for you.
In this film, Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, returns yet again, attempting to take control of the ever-sought-after Frankenstein monster, this time played by Lon Chaney Jr. Instead of attempting to control the monster, Igor becomes the monster during a sequence where Igor's brain is inserted into the monster's crumbling figure.
I have the strength of 100 men. I cannot die. I cannot be destroyed.
Released just 1 year after The Wolfman in March of 1942, the budget and box office are both rumored to be $200,000 and then a $1.5 million in return, but these numbers are only rumors and there's no official record verifying either. Its critical reception was fairly high as well. People reportedly liked the twists and turns in this film as opposed to the last Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein.
My brain will be your brains.
Here we are at yet another Invisible Man sequel that is technically not a horror movie, The Invisible Agent. Instead of being a screwball comedy, this film is classified more as a spy thriller action film. The grandson of the original Invisible Man is thrust into World War II using his newfound invisibility to spy on the Axis powers, aiding the Allied forces, hoping to bring the war to a close. This came about, of course, because World War II was actively happening when the movie premiered. The picture came out on July 31st, 1942, on a budget of around $330,000, and its war setting secured its hit status. The film was the highest-grossing Invisible Man sequel, earning $1 million during its theatrical run. Its reception was okay, with most people calling it successful only due to its release during wartime, with meek and stupid villains. The third Mummy film is a direct sequel to the last one, The Mummy's Hand. In The Mummy's Tomb, the mummy Kharis returns, played by Lon Chaney Jr. In this film, it's been 30 years since the climactic showdown with Kharis, but mummies never stay dead. The Egyptian high priest explains to his new apprentice how to resurrect the mummy and instructs him to wreak havoc on the men that foiled their plans 30 years ago. The film was released in 1942 and received pretty poorly. People thought it was entertaining, but not quite mentally stimulating or surprising in any way. Since there's no budget or box office numbers, who knows how much this slow, shambling mess made. It wasn't clear to audiences that something much bigger was brewing, but ready or not, here it came. Finally, we've made it to the first film in this cinematic universe to treat itself as the first ever cinematic universe. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. The picture was sort of treated as a no-brainer. The Wolfman was a smash hit, and Frankenstein had always been a successful franchise. Despite the film still being successful, the cultural zeitgeist was abandoning the Universal monsters. The United States was now firmly entrenched in World War II by the early 40s, and moviegoers were less interested in gothic monsters than they once were. Universal figured a massive crossover like this could revitalize a slowly dying brand. Kurt Siodmak returned to write the film after expressing to producers that he wanted a writing gig to purchase a new car, and thus, the crossover was born. The original idea was for Lon Chaney Jr. to play both monsters, but doing long hours in the makeup chair to bring to life a walking corpse and a furry was deemed too taxing. It was decided that Bela Lugosi would finally get his chance to play the monster, since his character Igor was still piloting the stitched-together body. The film premiered in 1943, and despite not having any information on its box office or budget, we do know that it was a success. Despite its financial gain, it was received critically fairly middling. Despite its epic showdown, most people viewed it as silly. Time has been kinder to this first Clash of the Titans, as it's viewed as one of the more important watches in the menagerie of Universal monster films. Lon Chaney Jr. became the golden boy for Universal during the 40s, and no more is that seen in his long streak of films, including Son of Dracula. In this picture, the spawn of Dracula, Alucard, attempts to coerce a southern belle in the heart of Americana who is obsessed with immortality.
Ours will be a different life, without material needs, that will last through eternity.
Eagle-eyed horror fans may recognize that name, Alucard, as belonging to the Alucard from the Castlevania franchise, and wouldn't you know it, that's something Universal invented completely by themselves.
D-R-A-C.
What are you mumbling about?
Nothing.
It's another Dracula sequel, this time with Chaney Jr., and although we don't have a number for its budget, we know it was well funded. As for its box office, all I could find is that it grossed about $11,000 in its first week. Critics and audiences seem to fairly enjoy the film, and regardless of its actual quality, it gave birth to one of my favorite video game protagonists of all time. First he returned, and now he's getting his revenge. Our next picture is the latest installment in the Invisible Man series, The Invisible Man's Revenge. The original intent for the film was to have Claude Rains return to the role of the Invisible Man, but his previous Universal horror affairs like the 40s Phantom of the Opera and Cobra Woman bored him, so he turned down his Invisible reprisal. The Invisible Man role went to John Hall, who had experienced being invisible as the titular invisible agent in his film. The film follows another Griffin relative, this time Robert Griffin, as he escapes a mental institution and is given an experimental invisibility serum to get revenge on the Herrick family, who he viewed wronged him. It's a similar song and dance to the other Invisible Man sequels, but was given a decent budget of $300,000. People even went to see the further adventures of the Griffin family, and the film made around $700,000 on its 1944 release date. Critics and audiences found the stories samey and the effects good, but predictable. This would be the last time we'd see the Invisible Man in a serious picture. Yet another Mummy sequel that follows a pretty similar plot to the last. This is The Mummy's Ghost, released in 1944. Karis returns, still played by the ever-lovely Lon Chaney Jr., and in this outing, an Egyptian high priest travels to the United States to resurrect the long-lost princess Anaka, and finds her resurrected in a young woman of Egyptian descent. There's some interesting tidbits I found about Chaney Jr. being extremely uncomfortable in the Karis makeup. This guy cannot catch a break. Chaney Jr. suffered from extreme itchiness and sweatiness and was completely powerless to stop either, leading to him accidentally squeezing the professor's neck in the film so hard he nearly fainted. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any numbers regarding the box office or budget of the film. As for reviews, it seems the time most critics found it mediocre, not really redeeming the Mummy's franchise's failing quality. The success and novelty of different monsters coming together, as first seen in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, was heavily replicated in our next crossover, the House of Frankenstein. Originally a project called Chamber of Horrors, the initial concept was thrown out and turned into the House of Frankenstein. In this picture, we get count them, three monsters. Of course, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and Dracula, finally making a reappearance. Lon Chaney Jr. returned to play the Wolfman, Frankenstein's monster newcomer Glenn Strange portrayed the bolt-necked nuisance, and Dracula's return was brought to life by John Carradine. Boris Karloff returned to the Universal monster mythos as well, playing Dr. Gustav Niemann, a role that didn't require hefty monster makeup.
You remind me of someone I can't quite recall.
Dr. Niemann is like every person with an MD in these movies, pretty much insane.
Now will you give me my chalk?
His goal is to resurrect all of the monsters and use them to pester his many enemies. Of course, without spoiling things, I guess you'll have to watch it to find out what chaos ensues as a result. House of Frankenstein was the highest budget ever given to a Frankenstein picture, $350,000. And its box office success reflected that, only grossing a measly $200,000 to $500,000. Its critical reception was rough as well. Critics found it boring and too nostalgia-baity. Over the last couple of years, the budgets went up and the box office numbers waned, as well as the critical reception of each movie. Audiences were going through their very own cinematic universe fatigue. And you know what would cure that? Yes, another Mummy sequel. How smart of Universal. This is the final nail in the sarcophagi for Lon Chaney Jr. as our villainous Charis and our final serious Mummy film. In terms of production notes, I couldn't find much other than its usage of a lot of stock footage. The plot follows Charis, who is shipped to the swamps of Louisiana, tormenting the locals in the search for his long-lost princess, Anaka. There are no surviving numbers of budget or box office, and its critical reception was truly rough, with critics and audiences calling out this lazy finale for using stock footage so liberally. It was released in 1944, and was truly a wet bandage and a fitting end for perhaps the most boring Universal monster series. We return to our second and final film in the House of series, and this time, we're visiting the House of Dracula. Universal came to their senses and created yet another massive crossover between the most famous in their pantheon of monsters in 1945. Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster reappear gloriously on the silver screen. The cast follows the same formula as House of Frankenstein. John Carradine as Dracula, Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, and Glenn Strange as Frankenstein's monster. This plot differs significantly. Dracula and Wolfman meet each other accidentally in the abode of Dr. Franz Edelman. Both seek a cure for their vampirism and lycanthropy, respectively. I find it strange that Dracula, king of the vampires, a character that embodies pure evil, is seeking a cure, but hey, maybe centuries of life have taught him to be a better fellow to mankind. Frankenstein's monster enters the fray when Larry Talbot, the Wolfman, falls into a cave and finds the dormant creature. Apparently, the film was originally marketed to feature Bela Lugosi's triumphant return to the role of Dracula, but Universal claimed he was working on other projects when in reality, he was never even offered the role, making iconic goth icon Bela Lugosi kind of the biggest punching bag on the Universal backlot. Its budget is more or less unknown, but its box office is reported to be around $500,000. Its reception seemed to be fairly similar to the previous House of picture. The atmosphere was thick, the acting and sets were top-notch, yet audiences found the cavalcade of monsters overcompensating for a lackluster story. I find it so funny to think that 80 years ago people had the same complaints over their movies as we do today. Too many uneventful and boring sequels and giant event movies that feel more like cash grabs than they do actual events. In the years after House of Dracula, it was clear that Universal was struggling to make ends meet. In 1946, they reported a profit of just $4.6 million and had to drop many actors from their roster. Universal was on the verge of bankruptcy and wanted to lean on the two biggest actors they had. It would be 3 entire years before audiences saw the Universal monsters again, and when they did, it would be unlike anything they had seen before. The next 3 Universal monster flicks in our documentary are very different from everything else we've discussed. These movies are Abbot and Costello comedy movies featuring the Universal monsters. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello were extremely famous comedians during the early and mid-20th century. You may recognize them for perhaps their most famous and often imitated Who's on First bit.
Well, then who's playing first?
Yes.
I mean the fellow's name on first base.
Who?
The fellow playing first base for St. Louis.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
These movies aren't about the plot and are mostly just vehicles for Abbott and Costello to run around and make jokes on the silly spook's behalf.
The one guy is the big, and the other guy, not like that, like this.
The title is somewhat misleading since they don't only come across Frankenstein's monster in this one, but Dracula, the Wolfman, and a certain invisible cameo as well. Frankenstein's monster is once again played by Glenn Strange, and the Wolfman is played by Lon Chaney Jr., but believe it or not, Dracula is finally played by Bela Lugosi once again.
Good evening, Dr. Mornay.
My dear Count, it's so good to see you again.
Abbott and Costello by this point were constantly fighting with each other and had medical problems consistently, and the set was a train wreck with both men regretting their decision and leaving early on multiple occasions. All of this chaos paid off magnificently for Universal, with the picture grossing around $2.2 million, genuinely helping to save the company from bankruptcy. Universal was happy, but it seemed like no one else was. Chaney Jr. even commented on how this film spat on the prestige of the monster movies he'd worked on for so long.
Where are they? They must be in there.
The next comedy romp is Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man, released in March of 1951. This film, like the others, follows two bumbling fools who come face to face with a monster. Our monster this time around, the Invisible Man, is played by Arthur Franz for his first foray into the role. There seems to be very little information about this one compared to the previous one. Its budget was around $620,000, with a box office return of $1.5 million. The final Abbott and Costello film for now is the two comedians meeting Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I was unsure if I should even include this movie at all, since it's the only one that technically breaks my rule of stepping out of the monster restraints set at the beginning, but it seems like most people consider this to be a true Universal monster movie. Again, it follows Abbott and Costello joking around a monster movie. Dr. Jekyll is played by the always lovely Boris Karloff, and in most promotional materials, he's incorrectly labeled as playing Mr. Hyde too, but Mr. Hyde was played by stuntman Eddie Parker. I do really love the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it's a shame I wasn't able to get around to talking about the original, but alas, this should do. The picture's budget was getting higher at $720,000, and the box office return was $1.2 million, a slow dwindle from the previous features. I was able to find out what people thought of this one, and they seemed to like it. Abbott and Costello were so popular that their names on anything would have meant raucous laughter anywhere they went.
Ask my mama how to make a monster.
By this point, I'm sick of the less than impressive sequels, the comedy, the bloat. If only Universal could come back swinging with a brand new monster to add to their pantheon. One that really stands the test of time. Universal delivered with their swampy threat, the creature from the Black Lagoon. Initially, the idea for a Fishman monster came from producer, writer, and director William Allen when he was at Orson Welles' house for a party. Mexican cinematographer Gabriel Fagora was also at Welles' party and told the audience the tale of the Quepactli, a half-fish, half-man monster that permeated in Aztec folklore. Allen was of course thinking on how he could turn this folklore into a picture similar to what Universal did years ago with the Wolfman. It took years for Allen to do anything with the idea until he thought of the classic fairy tale of Beauty and the Beast, and inspiration struck. The original script was simply titled The Sea Monster, but it was given a treatment by writer Maurice Zim. Writers Harry Essex and Arthur Ross teamed up to make the filmable script and came up with The Black Lagoon. The script was ready and the project needed a director, and they wanted the picture to be 3D, so they went with Jack Arnold after his previous directing work on the 3D picture House of Wax. There was a script, a director, but yet they needed a creature to feature and slime its way across the film. Arnold's notes were to make the creature eel-like, but unfortunately the designs looked too feminine and not nearly scary enough. The crew brought on Disney animator Millicent Patrick to design the creature. Patrick did a phenomenal job, of course, and is responsible for one of the most iconic movie monsters of all time. To celebrate the finalized design, Patrick went on a press tour with the creature itself to promote the picture. The beauty who created the beast went all over showing off Universal's new frightening achievement. Enter Bud Westmore, the head of Universal's makeup department. Westmore saw the glowing praise that Patrick was receiving and got jealous of all of her accolades, so he changed the tour's name to The Beauty Who Lived with the Beast and attempted to strip all credit away from her artistic achievement. Of course, unfortunately, in classic 50s fashion, she was let go immediately after the tour finished and denied any right to claim the creature for her own. It's one of the most heart-wrenching stories in Universal monster history. Only recently have we started to celebrate Patrick as the visionary she truly was. With the monster design completed, Arnold needed a man for the monster. Universal originally thought that Frankenstein monster actor Glenn Strange would be a perfect fit. Unfortunately, Arnold wanted something more physical from the creature and settled on Ben Chapman due to his height. Chapman played the creature for most of the picture, but for filming underwater, they needed someone more capable of performing the stunts. The man they chose was Rico Browning, and can I just say, this guy was unbelievable. Browning had to move and perform underwater, holding his breath for minutes at a time, all the while wearing a giant rubber fishman suit. The film was mostly shot on the Universal backlot with Chapman, but Browning did all of his underwater scenes in my home state of Florida in Wakulla Springs. I would also be remiss to not mention the beauty counter to the beast, Kay Lawrence, played by the lovely Julie Adams. Both Chapman and Adams had great chemistry on set, and their friendship and trust in one another really helped them shine as Beauty and Beast. Creature from the Black Lagoon released on March 5th, 1954. Unfortunately, I was not able to find its budget, but its box office was around $1.2 million. It did very well with audiences and almost immediately spawned 2 sequels, which I'll get into in a little. Its reception is interesting. At the time, I think most people saw this as just some average 50s sci-fi B-movie, but these days, this stands as a certified classic. As a kid, this was my personal favorite Universal monster movie. I always loved Creature, Gillman, or Creech as I lovably call him, to be just so cool. Over time, I've gained a real appreciation for the Gothic classics, but do not let that dissuade you from checking out this phenomenally swampy picture.
Yay! You got it! You got it!
So you may be wondering why I originally left the creature out of the monster discussion at the very beginning, and that's because he completely breaks the rules of this entire video. Most people consider true monster canon needing crossover features, but the creature never met any of the other wicked freaks in the universe. Of course, the inclusion of this film is essential when discussing the Universal monsters, and it just shows how the canon is really defined by popularity. Creature is right there with Dracula and the Invisible Man. He's one of the boys, and his popularity cements him into the canon, whether we like it or not. Since the Creature from the Black Lagoon was so creative and fresh, it felt only right to turn it into a franchise. This is The Revenge of the Creature. Jack Arnold returned to direct the film, and Rico Browning returned to play the Creature in all of the underwater scenes. The actual on-land performance for the Creature was swapped from Ben Chapman to Tom Hennessy. The film follows Creature surviving his encounter from the Black Lagoon and being transferred to an oceanarium in Florida. There, Creature can't help himself and falls in love with Helen Dobson, the love interest to Professor Cleet Ferguson, the man researching the ancient monster. Perhaps the most interesting thing to come out of this entire movie is this uncredited extra right here.
Well, maybe so, Doc, but there were 4 rats in there when I changed my lights. Now there's only 3.
Recognize him? If you said Clint Eastwood, you win, as this is the legendary actor's first ever on-screen performance, starting as an uncredited scientist to being one of the most well-known names in Hollywood. Revenge of the Creature released on March 30th, 1955, just 1 year after the original. I wasn't able to find its budget, but its box office was around $1.1 million. It was another great return for the Creature franchise, yet audiences found it pretty samey or boring. All that mattered to Universal was the money, and this is not our last time meeting the Creature from the Black Lagoon. Here we are at our final Abbot and Costello Universal monster flick. This time they come face to face with the Mummy. Different movie, same bits, Abbot and Costello find themselves running around with a mummy on the loose. This time the mummy is Clarice, not Karis, and he's played by Eddie Parker, who was Lon Chaney Jr.'s stunt double for Karis in those Mummy films. The budget for this was around $720,000, and I really wasn't able to find box office or critical reception at the time. At the time, Costello was still suffering from medical issues, and it's unclear as to if that's why this series never continued. Their relationship began to get more and more strained as well, and it led to their final meeting with any Universal monster in this film. Alright, here we are, the final Universal monster film most people consider to be in the canon. Of course, there's a few films after this that Universal released, but for us, this is the end. This is The Creature Walks Among Us. This picture was directed by John Sherwood and features a strange new story for the Creature. In this flick, the Creature escapes the oceanarium and is captured once again in the Florida Everglades. After he's badly burnt, he's given surgery and slowly starts to evolve into becoming more man-like. The doctors attempt to help Creech live amongst the humans, but of course, that never ends well. Creature this time around is played by Don Megawan on land, and still played by the legend Rico Browning in the water shots. The film was released in March of 1956 with an unknown budget from what I can see, but managed to gross $1 million at the box office. Each Creature film did really well, and I'm surprised Universal stopped at Creature Walks Among Us. What a journey through the first cinematic universe. There were plenty that I wasn't able to get to as well that I think deserve some attention. Later pictures like the Mole People in This Island Earth often get merchandise and action figures under the Universal Monsters banner. Of course, the Universal Monsters were not nearly as planned or interconnected as the MCU, but it's so fascinating to see how times really haven't changed at all. Almost 100 years ago, a studio struck gold and ran that gold into the ground until audiences just could not take it anymore. Universal had many attempts at reviving the monsters for the modern era, the first real attempt being 1999's The Mummy. Most everyone agrees that The Mummy is nearly perfect, and from there, it was all downhill. We've had some major box office stinkers like Dracula Untold, the seriously underrated Van Helsing, and of course, The Mummy 2017. That's not to say that the Dark Universe hasn't had any success. The Invisible Man from 2020 was a fresh and horrifying adaptation that supposedly could become part of a larger monster universe. It seems Universal had bigger plans for the monsters after their foray in modern films fell short. In Orlando, Florida, there lies a brand new Universal theme park, Epic Universe. Within the portals of Epic Universe, you can be transported to the Mushroom Kingdom, Burke, Magical France, and of course, Darkmoor, the home of the monsters. Dark Universe, called Darkmoor by its residents, is the love letter to the Universal monsters that fans like me have been waiting for our entire lives. The entire land is littered with characters, secrets, Easter eggs, an unfolding story of good and evil, and of course, Monsters Unchained. Perhaps Epic Universe's best ride, Monsters Unchained, is a dark ride that pits Dr. Frankenstein's descendant, Victoria Frankenstein, against all of the classic monsters. If only Universal could take what worked at the theme park and turn it into a stunning film universe. This video for Jiff and I was long overdue. Genuinely, our friendship wouldn't exist without these monsters, and without that, no Debunk file. The Universal monsters hold such a deep place in our hearts as individuals and as lifelong friends. Watching Cinemassacre's Monster Madness as kids, learning everything there was to know about these silver screen horrors. We used to stay up late watching these movies, unknowingly becoming inspired to create our own art. I think any fan of the Universal monsters has stories like this. These movies growing up were more oddities than icons like they are now. Sure, it's impossible to walk into a store during Halloween without seeing Frankenstein's monster, but now you can wear Boris Karloff's official green visage. It was a somewhat niche fandom in the late 2010s, with only DVD box sets and a Funko Pop here and there, but now NECA Toys has gotten the license to produce fantastic action figures. You can't even walk into a Hot Topic without seeing Frankenstein and his bride on a t-shirt. The joy I feel when new people find these monsters can't be explained, and now with the monsters seemingly at peak popularity due to things like the Dark Universe at Epic Universe, an entire new generation will experience these classic monsters for the very first time. The fandom. It's alive. It's alive. This Halloween night, share your stories with Dracula, with the monster, with the mummy, down in the comments below. Did I give your favorite its love, or did I skip over your favorite sequel? Let me know everything. It's a monster renaissance. Let's all celebrate together. Happy Halloween and happy Debunktober.